Are you tired of getting distracted every single time you try to spend time with God? I'm going to show you how to beat those distractions up next. So I want to hear from you. Drop yes in the comments below if you struggle with distractions. If every time you try to spend time with God, your mind starts wandering, you start to think about all those things that you've got to do throughout the day. Yeah, if that's you, my friend, I know, and I'm going to help you with it in today's video. My name is Tammy from Footprints of Inspiration and a Faithful God podcast, where I teach women how to let go of those unrealistic expectations surrounding their faith walk so they can create a deep and meaningful relationship with God. And today I'm going to share with you 3 things you can do to overcome those distractions. Number 1, what we need to do first and foremost, always, is we need to go to God and make that ask. We go to God and we say, Lord, help me with this. Lord, teach me how to, train me how to get less and less distracted and more focused on you. We go to God and we say, Lord, lay a hedge of protection around me to block out all those distractions so I can sit fully in your presence. Now, this takes training, as I just mentioned, right? We're asking God for that training, for that practice. This takes time to practice, but the more you do it, the longer you'll learn to focus, the longer your focus session will be. Yes, you're going to get distracted. That's a fact of life. We live in a world that is full of distractions. In fact, we have more distractions in our life now than in any other time in history. And so it's not about blocking or never ever having distractions. It's about learning how to focus longer, learning how to spend time in God's presence. And we always start by going to God and making that ask, asking for His help in doing that. Now, tip number 3 is going to be a game changer for you. It's the simplest thing, but it's going to be a game changer. So make sure you stick with me here. Number 2, you've got to get persistent and consistent. You have to be persistent and consistent in your pursuit of God. You see, if the enemy cannot destroy you, he will distract you. That is going to happen. So we know that's going to happen. So what we do, understanding that and having that or realizing his playbook, the enemy's tired old playbook. Why does he use it? Because it works. But what we have to do is, knowing what we know, that he will use distractions to pull us away from God. What we have to do is get, consistent and persistent. We have to be persistent in our pursuit of God. When we get distracted, we stop, set our minds back on God, and we keep on going. And when we get distracted again, we stop, set our minds back on God, and we keep on going. You know, one of my absolute favorite stories is from one of my students in the Grow Your Faith community. And one of the things that she did, she reached out to me one day. We were actually studying in that particular lesson, we were studying how to sit with God, how to listen for God. And she says to me, Tammy, you know what? I sat down, I was planning to spend 30 minutes with God today just listening. Now, can you imagine 30 minutes of uninterrupted time with no distractions? Yeah. None of us can even imagine that. And so what she said to me, she says, Tammy, but you know what? The first time I got distracted, I listened to what you said and I stopped. I set my mind back on God. I was persistent and consistent with this. And so I stopped and I set my mind back on God. She said, but then I got distracted again. So at this point, she's just a little more frustrated, but she says, but I stopped. I did what you told me. I got persistent and consistent, and I set my mind back on God. But then it happened again, a third time. And she says, she says at this point, she says, I'm frustrated, but she did it anyway. She was persistent. She was more persistent than the enemy. So she stops and she sets her mind back on God. And what happened? God, in 8 minutes, God didn't need 30 minutes to bring this to her, but in 8 minutes time, because she chose to be persistent and consistent in her pursuit of God, he gave her the answer to not one, but 2 very, very big questions she had. You see, if she would have let that distraction, that first distraction, or that second distraction, or that third distraction deter her, she would never have gotten the answers. God would not have been able to reveal to her what he needed to, or those answers to her questions. But because she was persistent and consistent in her pursuit of God, he gave her the answer again to not one, but two very big questions that she had. That's why we have to get persistent and consistent. It's not about never having distractions. It's about learning to overcome those by getting persistent and consistent in our pursuit of God. Now, step number 3 is one of my favorite things to do. It's one of my favorite hacks, actually. So what I want you to do is when you get ready to spend time with God, whether that's praying, whether that's studying or, sitting down and reading the Bible, I want you to grab some Post-it notes. Now, if you're out and about running around or you're out and about walking or what have you, pull up the Note app in your phone. You can use the Note app the exact same way. But every time when you get distracted, right? For me, it's always my to-do list. When you get distracted, not if, stop for a second, write down what it is. This gets it out of your head, number 1. Number 2, then you won't forget about it later. And again, if you're out and about doing this, you can put it on your Note app, right? Put a little note on your Note app. But then once we write it down, we then set our minds back on God. Why? Because we're choosing to get persistent and consistent in our pursuit of God. So grab that Post-it note. Silliest little thing, cheapest little hack. If you don't have a Post-it note lying around, maybe you've got an envelope that you got in the mail. Use the back of that. It doesn't matter what you use. Just make sure you have something so that, again, number 1, it gets it out of your mind. So that way it's gone. You don't have to think about it. You can turn around, set your mind back on God. And number 2, it helps you so you remember what it is that you needed to do later. It's one of my favorite hacks, and it's a hack I use every single day. Now, here's something that is really important that I really need you to understand. When you start doing these things, when you start making that asking God for help, when you start getting persistent and consistent in your pursuit of God, and when you take these little hacks with the Post-it note hack that I call it, when you do these things, Satan will turn up the heat. He is going to see that you are getting persistent and consistent. He is going to see that you are taking your relationship with God seriously. He's going to feel threatened by that, and then he will turn up the heat. Okay, let him. What that tells you is, you know what? I'm onto something here. I'm growing closer to God, and he feels threatened. You have the very power of God to overcome these distractions. And again, with these 3 little tips, this will help you do that. You have that power within you. Satan is no match, for the power or against the power of God. He is no match against the power of God, the very power that you have within you. Satan is going to turn up the heat. Okay. That's what he's going to do. It's his tired old playbook. This is what he does. But you choose to get persistent and consistent in your pursuit of God. You choose to make that ask. You choose to grab a little hack, stop getting frustrated every time you get distracted, because that's the life we live in, and instead say, okay, this is what happens. Let me just write it down, and then I'm going to go right back to God, right back to spending that time with God. So my friend, don't give in. Do not give in to him. You get persistent and consistent. And before you know it, you're going to discover that your focus is getting longer and longer and longer. And by the way, there will be days that even though you're doing better later on, there will still be days where it's harder to focus because you've got so much going on. There's so much going on in your plate. Right now, as I'm recording this video, we are in the Christmas season, which really takes a toll on our time, right? There's so much to do. That's going to happen. That's normal. It's not about never having distractions. It's about learning how to overcome them, learning these tips and tricks, and and overcoming them so that you can grow your relationship with God. So my friend, if you needed this today, this is something that you really struggle with, these distractions in your time with God, here's what I want you to do. I want you to give me a big thumbs up. Let me know that you like this video. And number 2, what I want you to do is be sure to subscribe to the channel below so that you make sure that you get notifications every single time that I put out a video. Now, these videos I was doing, these Monday, Wednesday videos, I was doing just for the month of December, but we are going to continue you, my friend. I am all about bringing you those quick, short videos that are going to help you stay connected to God on Monday morning. Get that week started with God, and in your midweek to really help you just kind of come back, regroup, and set your mind back on God. And then, of course, on Friday, we have our weekly podcast episodes. So those are a little bit more in depth, really digging into the Bible. So again, if you like this, give me a thumbs up, subscribe to the show, and I'll meet you in the next video.